In this lesson, I'll be talking about XGen. And if you look up at the top of the shelf, you should see the XGen tab. If you do not, go to Windows and then go to your Systems and Preferences and then Plugin Manager. And just make sure you locate that in your plugins and then enable. Just make sure that both XGens down at the bottom, you have the toolkit bundle that's loaded and auto load. And then I'll close out of that, but you should see this at the top of your shelf. Now I'll start with the basic scene and then just a sphere for practice. Now with my sphere selected, in fact let me just create a quick sky dome light for rendering purposes. So with my sphere selected, I'm going to add a new, open up the XGen window. So with that open, we do have a few options here. We have create a new description, so we'll be testing that out as well. We have import collection or description, so that is if you have set up a collection already, have a description, you can import that, or you can import a preset from the library. So let's start here, since this is kind of the easiest one to show you and explain, and then we'll go back to creating one from scratch. So I'm going to do an import preset, and then with that you'll see this XGen library window, and then if you select this you can take a look at all of the different presets available here. Some really cool options to start with. They do have grass, there's like a porcupine, so just a lot of different examples here. So let's say I do, that one's an interesting one, a calico cat. Let's say I do, I'll just pick one here. Let me just do this llama. And then a couple of ways to do this. You can either double click on it or right click and then import preset llama. When you do that, you get this window that shows up. You can give it a new description name, so I'll just do description and then give it a name llama collection, same thing. There's a couple of reasons why we want to do this, and actually I really should have, let me see here. Yeah, let me cancel out of this. I'm going to create a new project first. So I'll do project window. This will be XGen practice. And then I'll just go to the desktop, hit accept. Let me just do file, save scene as, and then XGen, just do V1. All right, so back to that. I'm going to import. I'm going to go ahead and import this llama, give it a name, and then here's the preset file name. It automatically kind of leads me to where this is located. New description name, and then a collection name as well, and then just click import. All right, close out of that, and then here is the llama. Here's the llama fur. Kind of interesting, right? So the way it gets placed, in this case, I just have it wrapping around the entire sphere. And then let's take a look at some of the settings in XGen. This is basically primitives. They're randomly generated across the surface. There is the density slider here. So, we can go ahead and reduce that or increase it. So whatever actually works for you in this case, and we can play with this a little bit later. And then if we scroll down here, we can see what type of a primitive this is, which is a spline. Likewise, you have spheres, cards, and archives that we can use, but I'll just leave this at default since this is already a preset that's set up. And then there is the length that I can adjust. There is a width. You'll typically see that there's always a taper, so you get the kind of nice tapered ends, and then taper start, end, and this is something that we'll play with. For the most part, these presets are kind of really nice. They're really nice to use. but by no means are you really kind of just stuck with it as is. You can customize this further. So, for example, there's tilt. You can do tilt along different UV axes, and then any bends, so the fur bending. And then, kind of scrolling down here, we don't really have any displacement or maps on this. Moving on to preview and output. You have, again, this is for preview purposes. If this starts slowing you down, you can definitely kind of reduce the percentage of what you're seeing here. And then we don't really need to cover these just yet. And then let's see how this renders out. So not bad, though not dense enough, right? So this is kind of fairly low density that I would more than likely try to actually correct here. So if I go back to primitives, and then here's my density here. Let's say I make it a little higher. And I can actually keep on increasing this until I'm happy with the result. And then do another render. So these presets are a nice kind of a start, right? So if you're not really sure what you want to go with, but you kind of have the general idea, maybe it's this kind of messy fur, which in this case is the the llama fur, but it can be used for so many different things. So that's in there. The preset is a nice way to start. Another thing I'd like to point out, in the outliner you have the collection. So in this case, this is our collection llama. We have the description. So with the description, if I open up the attribute editor, you'll see the hair physical shader. This is where you can change the color. And you have a number of things you can change here. You have the root color and tip color, which if I go back to my XGen window, let me check on actually the primitives. Let me just check on the modifiers. I'll go back to these. Actually, no, it would be better if we just stuck with the attribute editor. And then if I want to see what's mapped onto root color and tip color, I can just click on this. And then this is the attribute. So this is the attribute that then connects to this XGen. Now, back in this, let's see down here, we have highlight. So we have all the different highlight colors we can change as well as the transmission color. And then you can see that you do have the ability to go into transparency, ambient color, and so on. So those are all the settings that you can still change. Back in XGen, if I go under primitives, another thing you have that I want to mention, so you have the length and the width. And let's say you want to customize this. Well, you can just basically set the width to 0 and then use this ramp. There we go. So then you can use this ramp to kind of customize the width of this, of these particular primitives. And then kind of scrolling down here, again, we don't have a bump on this one. Now, some primitives or some presets, you may want to take a look at those and just kind of see what they have, just to see how they're built out, and that'll give you a good indicator of how you can replicate that on your own. Something else we're going to try here in just a bit is off to the right, you'll see this icon here. Majority of these attributes, I should say, actually all have these. This is expressions. So we're going to be able to kind of alter a specific attribute just by using an expression. So that's something we'll get to. Back into preview and output, just to go over what we have here. A couple of other things. You'll see what's currently enabled for this specific shader and its parameters, and then as well as what's on the surface. And a lot of these are just in there by default, especially, using a preset. Moving on to something called modifiers, and then I'll show you how to create your own modifiers. But in this case, what I'm seeing here is to basically create this llama fur. There was a noise modifier that was used. So for example, if I change the frequency, minimum, maximum, you'll see that it changes the noise. So basically how wiry this fur looks. The magnitude scale, so you can see how this was created. This down here tells me that this actually is an expression, and it's to randomize two attributes, correlation and then the length. And that's why, all of these primitives aren't these perfect, sizes, width, and so on. This gives some random properties to this specific noise modifier. Moving on, the coil, same thing. So the cool thing is just because it's in here doesn't mean that you have to, one, use it or leave it as is. If I check that off, that takes off the coil attributes, or essentially hides it for the time being. And then I can modify it further. I can modify the radius scale, and then you can kind of play with this and see how that alters the look and feel of this specific attribute. And then we have two different clumping modifiers that were used. And clumping is nice too because it makes, again, for these irregularities in the fur. So if I change the clumping, you'll see that it changes how these fibers kind of are essentially sticking together. And there are a couple of them, so that again, just to add that kind of inconsistency in the fur. Now in this case, grooming is not available because that's also for groomable, that's only for groomable splines, which is created during our initial description that we were adding. We have some utilities, which I'll get back into. So for example, once we start using guides to create our fur, we have something called guides to curves that I'll show you how to use. There's curves to guides. We have dynamic. You can copy. At the top here, you also have some other buttons and some other operations we can do, like for example this mirror selected guides across the x-axis. So that's something too that we'll be exploring. And here are your descriptions or expressions. So here we go, we have this noise, we have the fur noise is in here as well. So this is everything going into this specific llama fur that we have added. So just a couple of different windows that you really have to jump between to get to certain attributes. And then don't forget, also the attribute editor specifically for something like the, any of the color variations that you want to add. All right, so, and again, what I should mention is, once you start putting in fur, depending on how much of the surface you're covering, this density becomes fairly important. So even at 300, you'll see that this isn't really, covering majority of my sphere. So if I were to add more to the density, it makes it more dense. However, you can run the risk of obviously this slowing down. One thing you can do to fix that is really just this preview. So if I reduce that, let's see how long this takes to render, and hopefully it doesn't crash. But the surface will be more dense with these hair fibers. But the cool thing is the preview is a little bit lower resolution, right? So you can do that just to kind of save your sanity and save your system from being overloaded, and just save the actual density look and feel for the final a render where you don't necessarily need it to be that high for just preview purposes. You already are getting the feel for how these fibers look, even at a lower percentage of, you know, the full density that we're looking at here. All right, so another thing that I should note is that, again, it's important to have this file all created, right? So let me just open up a scene so I can just show you what happens here. And actually, I should just go to the Finder. I have too many things open right now, but I definitely want to show you what happens here. So here's that XGen practice folder that I created. What you'll see automatically is an XGen folder that gets added to the structure, and then you have your collections, in this case collection llama. Everything is in here and everything should stay together. So if I go under scenes, and then here I have my XGen, and then if I go back to that, let me just do a save. Getting back into this, what you'll see once I save the file that actually has an XGen in there, you'll have this XGen file that gets added to the scenes folder. It doesn't get placed in the XGen folder, but it will get placed in the scenes, and it's important to keep everything together for the sake of not losing the way your files read. All right, moving on. I have this surface here. I'm going to use this for kind of thinking of this as terrain, so I can put grass on there. And I have my sky dome light. So with the surface selected under XGen, I'm going to click on this open XGen window. I already did the preset, and as you can see, as you saw in the last part, there are a lot of presets to choose from. There is actually a preset for grass, but I want to, for the sake of, you know, kind of moving on to some of these other features of XGen, I'm going to create my own grass from scratch. So I'm going to, instead of importing a preset, create new description. This is going to be grass, and I'll just put my name on there. Collection, and I'll just put grass and then my name on there, just so I kind of know that this is the one that I've created. It belongs to this file. And then in this case, I have what kind of primitives are made by this description. Splines, this is good for long hair, vines, etc. We have groomable splines, short hair, fur, grass, etc. Custom geometry, spheres. Some of these other ones we won't get to just yet. But moving on down under generate the primitives, we have how do we want to generate these basically fibers. For something like grass, it works to have them randomly across the surface, but we do have the option to do uniform rows and columns or at specified points. Down at the bottom, we also have how do we want to control the primitives. We can place and shape guides, which we'll do in another segment. We can use attributes controlled by expressions. Now, something I want to point out here, which is unfortunate that I'm not able to show you this part in Maya. I believe there's currently a known bug with 2020 about the expression window, the expression editor not opening in XGen, and I've tested it out and it really doesn't, and so I can't show you this part. Expressions in this case are actually not too hard to use, but for the sake of this, I won't be able to show that. So I'm going to switch what kind of primitives I'll be using, since I won't be using expressions. I'll be going with groomable splines, which are good for short hair, fur, grass, etc. Perfect. I need this for grass. So I'm going to click on that, and then you'll see that as soon as I do, some of our other options at the bottom get grayed out. However, I now have the option to use groomable tools. So I'm going to click Create. I'm going to do File, Save My Scene, and then in this case I'll just overwrite this. All right, so now I have these little fibers, and then what I can do up at the top here, you'll see this little eyeball. This is to update the XGen preview. The drop down here actually also has update preview automatically. So if you select that and then just click on the eyeball, this will show you the actual primitives. So again, if this is becoming kind of a little too, overbearing for your system, maybe just go ahead and uncheck Update Preview automatically. But to preview your description that you'll be adding, this collection, you'll have to just click on the eyeball as you go. So for now, I'll just leave it here. Hopefully it doesn't give me too many problems. So under primitives, so same kind of concept here. We have taper, which I'll go ahead and do. Definitely want to give this a little bit of density. Keep in mind that the higher you do this, the more of the density you do, the more it may kind of slow you down. So this wouldn't be a bad idea to not worry about this so much, or under preview just bring down the percentage. Scrolling on down, we have, all right, I have the taper, so I'll go ahead and leave that. You'll see that the bend parameters, there are some, basically these are some expressions that are put in, and I'll go ahead and just leave it at that. And then there's really nothing else I need to do here. Under preview and output, again, I can probably bring this down a little bit. I don't need to see that much of density in my preview. And then I have modifiers, which I'll get back to, but then I have grooming. So under grooming, now we have, these are some of the grooming tools that we can use. For now, scrolling on down, I have my length. So I can increase that to make kind of this taller grass. And then I have width. And then, so I can leave it at that. The density, which I can increase here as well. So again, this is for these little guides that we're seeing here. And then under primitives, this is where your actual density will be modified. All right, so under grooming, what I can do here is I can do, let's say, for example, orient. So once I do the orient and I mouse over my surface, you can see that on the surface I have this brush. If I press and hold B, or actually, whoops, sorry about that. That's not what I was thinking of, another tool that I was showing you here. But this brush allows me to essentially just change the orientation. And then I can change the magnitude of this. All right. Also bend. This would be a good one. So I can customize that using the grooming tools. Again, keep in mind that for every tool that I'm selecting, I have this drop-down menu with some settings as well. Elevation, width, length. So again, these are pretty straightforward. Honestly, these tools, you just have to kind of play around with them. And then it may be helpful to actually turn on these guides so you can see how you're affecting the surface. But with that, I do also have modifiers. So let's discuss modifiers. Okay, so after we've taken a look at some of these brushes, and again, each brush has its own section for altering the attributes. What you're seeing down here, these settings are for these little, essentially these guides, right? You can turn them on or off. So also, let's say I have length, and then let's say I change the increments, the goal length, you know, how far up I want these, how I want to change this. You know, it's just worth kind of going through and kind of getting a little familiar with what you can do here. and you can type in a higher number if needed. So just because the slider only goes to a certain point, that doesn't mean that's it. So you can go higher. So again, you can kind of see that with length, now I'm altering how that looks. And then you have noise, you have repel, let's see here, attract. This one will kind of pull the fibers together and create essentially like these little clumps, right? Change the magnitude, change the fall off. So this is essentially this brush fall off. So take a look at some of the settings and play around with these. Now, let's get into the modifiers. So to add a new modifier, I'm going to click here, and then you can load, save, duplicate with this icon here. So you can also move modifiers down, so you can change the order of them as you start putting them in a scene. Once you get into the add modifier window, so for example, let me choose this noise here. Click OK. This adds a modifier, and you can disable it or enable it. And then you have the scale. So for example, let's say I kind of change the scale. I'm going to change this to a smooth interpolation. So here we go. Adjust that a little bit. Okay. So this is going to add some of this noise in here. And then how about magnitude? Let's try something a little higher just so we can really see this, right? Now obviously for something like grass this isn't ideal, but just showing you what some of these settings do. So if I just want to add a little bit of a variation here, I can add some frequency. And then in this case I can just go ahead and render just to see what this is looking like. Alright, so just with noise alone, it's kind of adding this kind of like this rough pattern to the grass, but it's taking away from you know, how initially the primitives all look alike. We definitely don't want that. We want to add some variations, and so they're not all consistent blades of grass. Now you can also add another, for example, if you want to add more noise, you can definitely do that. And so you can have more than one of the same type of modifier. So if I may not use the second noise, but I just want to add it in here so you could see. Notice how, you know, now I have two. So let's say I had a higher magnitude on this one. So again, you can add that second modifier, and then I'll just delete this one. Oops, I'm going to undo that. I don't want to delete the plane. Right click and then delete. And then, so let's say you have directional force, cut, clumping, for example. I'll get into some of these other ones in just a bit in another part of this XGen lesson. So here's clumping. This one down here, the clumping effect, you can scroll down here to, let me add, for example, a higher variation here. Down at the bottom you have the noise effect, you have the flatness, the offset, the curl effect, and if you click on set up maps, I'm going to bring up this window here. You can create the density and then hit save for an example. Well, actually, let's see here. Generate that, save. So that added a little bit of this this clumping, and again, it's not ideal. So you can preview guides. And you can again, if I click on this, I can set up maps. So if I want to do density, so here it is. Click on generate so I can see how this looks. And again, I do have the ability to now take, in this case, the little curl effect. I have the offset as well. I can change the noise, the cut, and the copy, but I can essentially change how it looks here in this clump scale. All right, so once again, I can go ahead and render this to preview, see how this looks. So the clumping does add, essentially kind of pulls some of these fibers together. And I'll get back into a lot of these, let me go in here, this modifier window. And then that way you can really see, right now I'm trying to go after somewhat of a grassy effect. But let me come back into this in the next segment, and then I'll get back into clumping as well as some of these other modifiers that we can add. But every time you add them, they will be added to this list, so that's helpful. I'm going to just change the color here. So go into this hair physical shader, we have the root color, which in this case I can do maybe like a darker green. And then we have the tip color. So again, I can maybe use a lighter green. We have different highlights as well. So maybe the highlight can also be a brighter sort of maybe like this yellow. And then let me render that. And now we're starting to get a little bit more of this grassy type of an effect. Now, once you have this in there, again, let me just go back to XGen. You do have certain variations here that you can play around with. Again, you have access to taper. There is different tilt that you can do. I don't need to do that with this. I'm kind of happy with the way it turned out for the most part. You have the preview output, so you can still go back and change some of the settings. So you're not necessarily just stuck with what you have, that was created on initial, basically placement. So again, under grooming, I can scroll down here. Let's say I realize this grass is a little too long. Maybe I'll bring that down a little bit. Change the width, so again you can still customize a little bit of how this looks, as well as the density. And then if you need to go back and use some other modifiers, like let's say you want to bend, some of this grass, you can certainly do that. And then I'll zoom out and do one final render here. And here's some kind of like this irregular type of grass, but not bad, not bad. I think I would go in and play with the colors a little bit more, but this is a good example of how you create a collection or a XGen description from scratch instead of using the available presets.